Okay. So essentially what we're doing is you can see who the panel is and you can see from the program what they do, but just very briefly before we start, I want to say the aim of this session is, like other sessions, it's to understand what are the global sector trends, what's happening in Asia and Europe. But for this particular session, we're going to zoom in on Japan-Ireland MedTech partnership opportunities. Perhaps we'll start at the end here with you, Nigel, and just go one by one. Could I ask each one of you very briefly to say who you are, what's your title, what's your organisation? It's all in the programme, not very long, sweet. And what does your organisation actually do in the context of today? Should we start with you, Nigel?
Yeah, my name is Nigel Phelan. I'm a co-founder of Invera Medical. So we're a bioinnovate spin out from the University of Galway. We're now based in the Innovation Hub in ATU. We're developing a device for treating venous disease, which is everything from varicose veins to venous leg ulcers. It's one of the most common vascular conditions in the world. We have a very strong link with Japan. In 2019, we raised a seed investment round, and that was led by a Japanese corporation, JETRO Medical, who are one of the world's largest medical device, pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical packaging companies.
Okay, thank you very much. Marc?
Good morning, Marc Mitsui. Not specialist in the MedTech area, but Mitsui is an investor, a partner, a trader, and here to help. We have our ecosystem in this area, and it's great looking out here, especially being footballer. It's great seeing the strength of the ecosystem here and trying to see how they can be connected.
Thank you, Marc. And before we pass out to John, just to mention that Mitsui do own the largest private chain of independent hospitals across Asia, which has 83 hospitals in 10 countries, if I'm sorry, which we'll get into later. Yeah. And as you can see, we're happy to bring back the Galway diaspora to Galway. And when I introduced Marc to people last night, they were, this is wonderful. Where is he coming from? Is he coming from New York or, Sydney or where? I was at Dublin. So as a Corkonian introducing a Galway man to Galwegians, that was good fun. Okay, and then on to you, John. Thank you again for yesterday. Do you want to, I know you need no introduction per se, but for some visitors from Japan, etc., you might briefly explain who you are and what Aerogen does.
Yeah, good morning. Yes, John Power, I'm the founder, CEO of Aerogen. We're an Irish MedTech company and drug delivery, and we've got pharma business as well that we're emerging, should we say, pharma and specialty pharmaceutics. Our products are used for delivering drugs to patients on ventilators, predominantly, but also in the ED and wards. So you imagine during COVID we were very busy people. And our products are sold in 80 countries around the world. We have about 200 people overseas and about working in the company in terms of commercial and medical affairs. And about 400 here in Ireland, between Shannon and Galway. So we're the world leader in our space, and we have office in Tokyo, and we see Japan as probably one of our biggest emerging markets over the next 45 years.
Well, thank you very much. It's perfect. I feel like I'm becoming an ambassador for Aerogen because, of course, it is the number one, the world leader in acute care aerosol drug delivery, and over 20 million patients, as John said, in 80 countries have benefited from their high-performance vibrating mesh nebulizer technology. That's quite long to say, John. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. David, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm David McKernan. I'm Director of Operations in Veryan Medical, based in Galway. We make stents for the peripheral arterial disease, so for the legs primarily. We've got some novel technologies that we've patented that help improve long-term outcomes of the stents without applying drugs. We were purchased by Oatskill Medical, in Japanese, a pharmaceutical company. They're about the scale of Boston Scientific, but relatively not well known within the West. Most of their sales are in that area. They purchased us really fundamentally. They had a lot of pharmaceuticals that they want to try and have an application within devices where there are other methods of applying their drug or using it in combination with medical devices. So I think it's an example of where innovation in Galway and Ireland is attracting investment from Japan to Europe and Ireland.
Thank you very much, David. And Hideo-san, so you've been very courteous, and could I ask you to explain who you are and what your role is with JETRO, and just very simply what JETRO does for people who don't know.
Thank you for today's meeting, and I'm honored to speak in Galway. I'm Director General. I'm Hideo, Yura, Director General of the JETRO London office. So I'm flying frequently to Ireland and joining meetings with Asia Matter or some other meetings, business meetings. And we are very keen to match or make coordination between Irish companies and Japanese companies. Especially, there are many Japanese companies branches or offices in Europe, including Ireland. So we are matching these Japanese companies and startup companies in Ireland and European countries within Europe, and not consulting to the headquarters in Tokyo. That's a very convenient and efficient way to match the relation. And I'm also visiting many universities. So this time I'm very happy to talk with very important to universities here in Galway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Arigato gozaimasu. And we're also quite fortunate today that George Onishi from Enterprise Ireland is with us, visiting from Tokyo with some clients from Mitsubishi Medical. There's Masahiro Hidaka and Tetsuya Maegawa. So you're very welcome. Gentlemen, would the three of you stand up so people can talk to you later? So since we are talking about Japan, so I suppose really and may I compliment the Minister, who we're actually on time, which is wonderful always, very appropriate for a Japan session. John, could I suppose ask you to set the scene? So, as I say, people here know who Aerogen is, but following on from yesterday, John, could you set the scene really for the session, given yesterday's conversation, the fact that you're opening an office now in Tokyo, the importance you said about the Japanese market and what success in the Japanese market could mean to a company like yours?
I think Aerogen, because our products are used by and have been used from day one by the larger multinational companies. So if you think of GE and Medtronic and Draeger, Philips, they all use our technology on their ventilator platforms. So in a way, that caused Aerogen to become globally focused very early on. Normally, you'd start your business in a local area. For most Irish MedTech companies, it would be looking at the US market as probably the primary market to go after. But I guess for us, because our products were used globally by the multinationals, we ended up following behind that. So typically what we do is we'd build out by putting regional commercial managers in. So Asia Pac, Northern Europe, and all the regions basically. And then we'd support distributors, our multinationals and distributors then in those countries. And then once the business looked as if it was, say, growing past what our distributors would do, we would put our own people on the ground. So we would be direct now in terms of sales in America, in Germany, in France, in the UK. And so all the major markets now, the market that we haven't gone direct in is Japan. We've used partners in Japan to distribute our products, but we found over the years that really if you want to penetrate business, it's not, you might get some early wins with distributors, but you really need to have your own people promoting the products and knowing what the market's like internationally. So Japan is one of 3 countries that we are really putting a strong focus on now over the next 3 to 4 years. Typically, Japan would probably be regarded as 3rd or 4th biggest medical device market in the world. So, you know, it's a major market to go after. Obviously, you have cultural, language challenges. America's very easy in that regard, right? You can find your way into the American market and start small and grow. Japan, we have been in Japan for, I suppose, a decade now, but really just maintaining a level of business. We need to really figure out, I haven't figured it yet, but we will figure out what's the step change we need to make in Japan. We put good people on the ground now. We have Japanese staff who've been with us for a few years, and we've now brought some of our more experienced staff who've developed markets in the rest of the world into Japan and actually living in Japan to try and support and use the tools we've used to grow business elsewhere in the Japanese market. So, I mean, it's early, although we've been there a long time, it's really early days in terms of a focus on Japan.
Thank you, John. And as you said at the session yesterday as well, you know, you have to invest in the market to succeed and become profitable. And do you want to make a comment on that?
Well, it's like America would be probably almost half our business, 44% of our business. We have 100 people full-time in America. But America for many years was a cost center for our business. We didn't make money in America, and the thing is, you can't dabble in these markets. That's the thing. You've got to really double down, as we did over many years in the US before we could turn it into a profit center for the business. The expectation in terms of service requirements is far higher in America than it would generally be in Europe. So they want people available. They want your medical affairs people available at the drop of a hat. You know, it's a different type of service requirement. Japan, it's obviously also very high service requirements, so it's not something you can go into that market without putting money, resources behind building a business there. And it takes time, but you know, that's one of the beauties of being a privately owned company. We have time. We think long-term investments. We're not quarter by quarter governed. Of course, we're trying to improve our performance all the time, but it's not like a publicly listed company that will make decisions in a short-term basis to get good results. We'll invest over many years to see good business created. And I think that in many ways, if you look at Japan and you study anything about Japanese companies, and I mean, many of them are some of the oldest companies in the world. They believe in long-term partnership and investment. I think that's how it operates there, and that fits our model really.
I think it's a great insight for people to understand that Asia takes time and it takes investment, you know? Because people often say to us, it's a bit crude, it's a bit simple, but people say, how do I sell to Asia? And we normally answer in 3 ways. We go, which Asia? There are many Asias. Yeah. And let's say they go, how do we sell to Japan? We go, which Japan? And finally, we say to them, what are you willing to invest? You know, because the best way to sell anywhere is first you invest time, people, resources, whatever. And you mentioned as well, John, if I may say so, I've seen it's in public domain. So you mentioned your own relationship with Temasek, and they're that kind of long-term investor, patient. Do you want to make a comment on that?
Just again, we chose Temasek really as an investor because they're the state fund of Singapore. Although they don't like to be called that, but they've got one investor, and that's the Singaporean government. But the reason we chose them as an investor, we were trying to exit some early investors from the business, and we thought we'd bring in one partner, and we thought strategically about what type of partner we wanted. We didn't want a normal private equity play that would look to bolt on, pump up the business, squeeze the bottom line and exit, which is the general play with them. So we looked around, we wanted someone with what they call patient equity, which would be the likes of Temasek. They've got, as when I spoke to them the first time, and I expressed my views on what type of investor I wanted, they said, look, we invest for generations. So is that long enough? And I said, yeah, that's fine. But it's getting the right type of investor, and indeed, Temasek have been very helpful as well, because as we were focusing on our Asia business, we wanted an investor based. We know our American business, we know our European business quite well and intimately, and we're well connected. Asia was an area we weren't really connected in, and Temasek had been useful as a minority investor in the business to open doors, make connections, which has been very beneficial for us.
I mean, beautifully said. I remember when I lived and worked in Japan visiting Panasonic, and they kindly, there was a small group of us, and they gave us a tour of their future labs. And they had, I always remember, there's a total of 500 people. There were 300 people in the future labs just for what's going to happen in society and the world in the next 50 years. There were 150 in kind of 50 to 150 years. And then there were 50 people working for, 150 years plus. And we were fascinated by the 150 years plus. So we said, what do you do? Which is the simple question you ask. And they said, well, we're looking at when humans will live in space. What planets they will live in, and the different kind of, the impacts of the different gravitational influences and all this. And they were already planning products for when human beings will live outside planet Earth. That's what you call advanced generational planning. Listen, thank you so much, John. Let's move on to you, David. David, you gave, when we were preparing for this, you gave some great insight on the demographics of Japan and how that plays to the MedTech sector. And you also, if I may ask you also to comment on the complementarity. I don't have the medical language because there's so many vascular things, but you said, whereas in Ireland we're very good, I'm using incorrect language in the vascular side of things, whereas in Japan it's very good at the scanning and imaging, and so it's very complementary. Do you want to comment on both those? First, the demographics, please.
So the biggest trend in healthcare in medical devices that outweighs all others is the demographics and the aging population. An individual who's aged 85 or more will have 6 times the medical costs on average than someone who's aged 60. So as the population ages, the cost of medical care ramps up exponentially, and that's the biggest trend. I hear people talking about on radio, they're talking about why are healthcare costs going up, what's involved, and they say things like, oh, the companies are charging more for devices or for pharmaceuticals. About 15% of the total cost in healthcare is pharmaceuticals and devices. 85% of the cost is something else. By far, medical devices reduces the cost of care and improves outcomes in healthcare, and it's not a driver of cost, and it's not going to be a solution to finding them. But on terms of demographics in Japan, Japan on average, the average age is about 10 years more than the age of an American, the average age of an American. Only Monaco as a country has got a higher age profile. So that aging profile means there's different disease states that need to be treated, and there's quirks in their system of treatments, like AV fistulas. They've about twice the rate of performing those than there is in Europe. The complications of cesarean sections that are twice the rate there than there are in Europe. So there can be, if you're a medical device company and looking for which market next, certainly for Japan, for Asia, there could be a niche where there's something very different to work on or to work with. I do think medical devices, we're framed by a regulatory regime that very limits and conducts what we can do. So in Japan, when you get that regulatory approval, along with that, you in effect get the compensation rate for the device of what it's going to sell for in Japan. So I certainly think if somebody's thinking of entering that market or a medical device company, they should figure out what that rate is very early in the journey, because it could be a factor of 5 different than the USA. So it could be a huge difference, so it could be completely impractical to make it, or it could be a real niche that could be a gold mine to initially enter. If considering it from a regulatory field, one of the things to do, if possible, if the company's got time, for the clinical, at the very start when you're thinking of launching the company, if you can include either one site in Japan or get the Japan authority to sign off on a clinical trial being completed, for example, in the USA, it means your device, that clinical, will be accepted in Japan and you won't need to run a second one. So there's a lot of ways that you can help yourself enter, even if it's not your first market to enter, you could make it easier to enter later on. So key area in terms of trends, I would say the aging population is number one trend. It's not the only trend, but certainly number one. A second area that's a key trend in terms of medical devices is new medical devices typically create new markets that grow the overall market. So a new treatment that comes along will offer new treatments, but won't destroy companies that are already there. So when you mentioned about the age of Japanese companies, if you looked at the average age of a medical device company on the S&P 500, most of the companies, the average age is about 70 years. A lot of companies, 150 years or more, but the average age of a company in the S&P 500 is 20 years. So medical device companies aren't destroyed by what I call is waves of constructive innovation, where destructive innovation, where a new innovation destroys what's there. An unmet clinical need is almost like, if I want you to imagine what that looks like in a hospital, an unmet clinical need is where a doctor says to a patient, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. So when a medical device company is being innovative and beats the path of an unmet clinical need, what they're doing is offering hope to someone today who's told, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do.
Which is amazing. And,
Yeah.
and I think that you had said when we were preparing, my MedTech for Dummies is coming back to me now, that you said that Ireland was very strong in cardiovascular and orthopedic. So we're not competing with Japan, whereas they're very, very strong on the imaging. Could you talk about that complementarity?
Sure. So kind of the medical device cluster in Ireland was forced into existence from multinationals, almost gave birth to. We've a different journey than a lot of clusters or areas that have been created in other locations. And our strength, 75% of the value by medical device exports in Ireland are around vascular and orthopedics. That's 75% of 16 plus billion that was exported on medical. We are the largest exporter of medical devices in Europe, not in proportion. By value, we export more than Germany. But in Japan, for example, they're extremely strong on things like imaging, CRT, capital equipment, where there's almost no presence of that in Ireland. They were 90+% of flexible endoscopes at one stage. So they have niches where they're very strong. I think Ireland offers very complementary areas in terms of the vascular and strengths in different areas, and that Japanese companies can buy innovation. I mentioned large companies aren't destroyed in medical devices, they grow, but they get stuck in what I would call the innovator's dilemma. They've got a successful product set, they're growing that product set, and because it's highly profitable, when they're analysing, they've got phase gates to say which projects we're going to work on. When they're analysing it, it's always most profitable to reinvest in the product that's working. So what will happen is they'll take that product and they'll make incremental improvements on it. Sometimes they can introduce radical devices like, if you're in orthopedics, they'll introduce a robot, but it'll be for orthopedics, not in other areas. So they're stuck in an innovator's dilemma. What small startup companies give is to give them an opportunity to get differentiated innovation, and they overcome that dilemma by buying companies. I certainly think Ireland, if we have a dynamic system with lots of startups, we can offer companies like in Japan some of that innovation that they can buy into. And certainly that's Veryan got bought by Yura Medical because we've got some innovation that they want to buy into and an opportunity to expand that will kind of be a trend across the board again, that medical devices globally follow that pattern of established companies find it very difficult to break out of that innovator's dilemma. We have a company like John's where the owner is still present. They can do that because they're not worried about share price in the stock market. They can come in and say, we're going to do something different and do it. And everyone in the company's probably going, oh God, what's the idea now? But they can make things happen and differentiate. Larger companies find a real struggle to break out of that innovation. So that's where startups and a dynamic cluster really makes a difference. And those clustering effects are very localized. 5 to 10 kilometers, they would say, most innovation went out. I looked at all the medical device patents in Ireland where the principal person had an Irish address. So you must have an individual must have a name on a patent. It's not just a company. We looked at 1/3 of all patents for medical devices were made in Galway over the last 15 or 20 years. But it's a small number of people that have got the bulk of that. And when you look at co-contributors and the links between them, there's a very small pool of people that are responsible for that cutting edge, making a real difference in innovation. So small world, I think that's what we can offer to Japan. For Japan also, I think the big difference, for example, being bought by Yotsuka Medical, we've been bought by an American multinational. I think as a company, we'd have been absorbed into the network very quickly. We'd be in a corner of a clean room, and any sense of our organisation would have disappeared. Whereas Japan, they're in there, and they're making statements like, that I've never heard an Irish person say, we're not worried about making any money. No, don't be scared to think about the long term. They're just words and sentences that
Wonderful.
I've never heard in an American multinational either, but a different with that patient build-up. Like you can tell a lot about the culture of a company from the stories that they tell, and their stories would be about, we spent 30 years developing a particular drug, and we didn't go outside of our area. In Japan.
This is Otsuka now. Yeah.
Otsuka, yes. They were telling this story about themselves. I think it says a lot about their culture and their outlook. We spent that time. We could have done it faster. We'd have given money or got somebody else to do it for us. We could have done it so much faster, but we've learned, and we now have got that as our insight, and that's still their philosophy.
But it's wonderful, and one of the things I love about Japan is that no matter what job anyone does in Japan, there's a kind of a national cultural DNA belief, as I see it, that everyone's constantly in pursuit of perfection. No matter what you do, you can't do it well enough. And things that we would consider very, very boring, people do because they really want to do the job well. I remember, God, so many years ago now, first time I stayed in a hotel in Tokyo, I was fascinated. I actually met the owner of the hotel, and we bonded as Irish people do. And I said, I'm fascinated by your service, it's so amazing. So he showed, when they took on new graduates, and they were graduates, university graduates, they trained them literally every aspect of the hotel. So they spent the whole day just greeting people arriving in taxis and going from the taxi to the hotel reception. They spent another day reassuring people, if the room wasn't available, where their luggage would be and what are they going to do in the meantime, showing them to the cafe or places going to local area. And they did very simple things, like they would cover the luggage with nets, like fishermen's nets, so people would feel psychologically reassured, oh, my luggage is safe, no one's going to take it. They spent another day showing how to escort people from the reception to their actual room. 3 days. When you compare this, with all respect, to tourism services anywhere else in the world, and that's just one example. What you're saying is very insightful, and what you were saying about the demographics, of course, not just Japan, it's East Asia in particular, China, South Korea as well. And what John was saying earlier as well about following the multinationals, a lot of Irish companies succeed in Asia by following the multinationals, because they're clients. Greg Timmins, again, public domain, who set up Takeda in Ireland. When they were setting up the second plant, Takeda in Osaka were so impressed by the Irish workforce, by the quality of the workforce, the quality of the product, the quality of the management, the pro-business environment, that they decided to open a second Takeda plant in Ireland to service the Japanese market rather than open in Japan. Think about this. And Greg said it was fine, it was all wonderful, everything was good, but there was one small issue. the tablets that they produced, which they were selling in EMEA, were only 92. I could have the figure wrong, so don't quote me on this, but I think it was something like 92.8% white. Now, in terms of, medical benefit, in terms of safety, there was no risk to anyone, but they were 92.8% white. And to the naked eye, they looked white, but they were not 100% white. So the Japanese refused to accept it for the Japanese market because it had to be 100% white. So they changed it. And then he said they automatically didn't change it to 100% white for every market, even though no one had ever commented on this. So Japan raises your game in quality. Hideo-san, you've been very patiently listening. As you can see, a lot of trust in Japan, doing business with Japanese people, and we'll talk later about IP. Your IP is protected strongly in Japan. Have you any comments to make on what the panel have been discussing, or what you see as the potential for Japan-Ireland partnership in MedTech?
Yeah, thank you. I have my parents in Japan. They're in their 80s, still healthy, and I think we are allowed to the Irish equipment or remedies for their health, and that's the key point. Japanese government, Japanese society rely heavily on the new technologies for keeping health, and that's why we are keen on introducing new technologies from the world. Ireland is a very good source for introducing new technologies, and Japanese market is not an easy market, but as the people speakers say, it's a very long-term relationship business circumstances. So once you enter and make good relation with Japanese companies or Japanese suppliers, it's very good. And in the medical business, the medical doctors, their mother department in the universities, medical department, is a very good starting point for introducing new equipment. Like Keio University has a strong relationship with their graduates all over Japan to operate their medical services. So universities is also a good starting point to introduce new technologies. And in the case of JETRO is also a public organization. We are keen on talking with new startup companies, younger than these two very good established companies, but we are now talking with Portashed Rogers-san very much, and we invited several Irish companies to Japan to expand their first services, first products in Japan. So in Japan we have several exhibition events, medical exhibitions, and we invite foreign companies to have business relation conversations with Japanese big pharmaceutical companies like Takeda or Otsuka, and we are successfully continuing our conversation promotion between them. One of the startup companies is Medicity from Galway, and we also invited the company to the Japanese MedTech exhibition quite recently, and arranged several conversations within it.
And of course, next year we have the expo in Osaka, and of course Osaka is the heart of the pharma sector in Japan. And certainly when I lived in Japan and then came back to Ireland, I think a shock for all Japanese people who come to Ireland, with respect, is our school system. Because in Japan, it's required that children eat meals in school based on nutrition, and they change this all the time, and there's maybe something like 30 different nutritious ingredients that children have to have every week in the school system. So this focus on health begins at a very, very young age. Marc, over to you. I was very surprised. I didn't know about, until you educated me, about Mitsui owning this largest network of private independent hospitals throughout Asia, and even expanding Turkey, and even here in Europe, Turkey and the Netherlands. And you said there are 83 hospitals in 10 countries. Could you tell us about this, and also what Mitsui is actually doing in MedTech?
Yeah, sure. So Mitsui is a very broad general trading company. We've been in Ireland for over 50 years, and we're involved in very traditional things like exporting cheese to Japan, or milk powder around Asia, aircraft leasing, and that type of very traditional sort of trading, and sometimes financial investments. But rather than the traditional model of just representing or importing and exporting, we look more at sectors as a full ecosystem. And I think this is a great sector which truly is an ecosystem. So we actually have coupled our wellness and our food and nutrition areas. And rather than being specialists in one area, Mitsui tends to invest across the value chain. So with those two coupled centres, we've been investing, and we've been supporting companies. So investment, rather than just providing stuff, shall we say, most of our stuff used to go in containers, but now we're more of a service-related company, and that's what brought us into the healthcare provision, rather than supply. So the hospital chain that we are involved in is expanding, and it's recognising it, and it's expanding in the higher end. It's more the sort of in Asia, as affluence spreads, it's more of a private healthcare provision, but that's something that we do intend to see growing. But that's one part of this ecosystem. The other part then is working with companies and helping companies make the most of getting into that themselves. So, I mean, it's been very interesting here, the mix of experiences of how to get into the Asian market. Maybe we can focus on Japan for this discussion, although it does apply across Asia. I think John's approach of the combination of having the multinationals but doing it yourself is fantastic. And maybe having somebody in the nuts and bolts of the trading is a wonderful combination approach. And then the investment, the Osaka investment from Japan is another approach. But what differs, I think, today from the past is the level of support that there is for companies who want to get into Japan. So you have JETRO, and you have Enterprise Ireland. You've got Enterprise Ireland bringing Japanese companies who actually are interested in buying product. So you've never had it so easy, guys. I mean, there's a lot of ways there, but I think what is clear is that there is a great market in Japan. The medical device sector, as well described, is huge and is only growing. But for your companies, there are many ways of doing that. And that's the bit that I think today helps. And Asia Matters, of course, coordinating and bringing us all together. But it's a case of just taking time, seeing what you want to be, and then looking at the different approaches. So definitely using the support, the combination of universities, the respect that gives, the entry into the market, using the support of Enterprise Ireland, JETRO, and then companies also like Mitsui. And we do invest in companies. And sometimes we in the old days we might represent a company. We tend to work more on a partnership base, sit down with companies and say, well, where are you going? Does it matter where we're going? And maybe invest, maybe put people in. And there's other companies as well as Mitsui doing this. But there are many paths to Japan, and the trading company model of today is one of those, where there can be equity. Then it's also obviously the easy bit is connecting partners with, be it the hospital chain or the other parts of the wellness ecosystem that we are part of.
So after you said those very nice things about Asia Matters and others, let me be tough on you now, right? The question people will want to know is, if you've got 83 private hospitals in your network, how can the MedTech companies here kind of get into that kind of value chain, supply chain, connect with them? Can you do that directly, or is there a way to?
Yes, we can. So we do have, internally, we do have a department who does, is the window to that. We're not allowed to phone all 82 of them, but we do. I mean, because we are trying to, we're not just offering a service, we're trying to expand, grow, and offer the best service. So we are looking always to see how we can improve our service, and that then gives us the opportunity to bring partners into that and help them and help us to grow this market.
And when you screen those companies, what are your criteria?
Like anything, I'm 36 years now working with Japanese companies, and some of the things that you've already mentioned, it's long-term approach, it's vision, it's service. These are obviously the products should be of interest, but that's a given. Otherwise, we would have a discussion.
Okay.
But the thing is, a company with a long-term vision, good product and good service. So the excellence in service
Okay.
is very
Great.
important.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. And Nigel, I'm conscious of time. It's running away with us here. And David's comment earlier was very impressive when you said a third of all patents are from Galway.
Within Ireland.
Yeah, and 300 of those are Aerogen, so that's probably well done. So, Nigel, let's move to you. You have this experience. You're a co-founder of MedTech startup. You've got heavy, significant Japanese investment from the beginning. How did that happen? What's it been like? What's it like working with Japanese investors? Who do they sit on your board and they join
So I mean,
the kind of quarterly meetings?
Yeah, we're very lucky. Obviously, we got early corporate investment in Japan. That opens a lot of doors into the Japanese market. It was actually through the MedTech strategist meeting, which is held in Dublin every year. It's kind of like Dublin is like a satellite almost of Galway in terms of MedTech at this stage, but they were part of that investment.
Dublin's a satellite of Galway.
I'm from Dublin, so
well, as a Corkonian, we don't really question
so yeah, that's how the conversation started. We're lucky. I think you need to partner with people who have experience of dealing and doing business with Japanese companies. So Paul Gilson is our chairman. David knows him well from Veryan as well. He has experience in doing business in Japan. So that was definitely beneficial for us. So when we set up the board, one of the directors from JETRO and one of their senior engineering managers would join us in our board meetings. So we have that kind of ongoing relationship. Unfortunately, it was just at the start of COVID that we got the investment, so there wasn't that many opportunities to travel to Japan after the initial investment. But yeah, we maintain close ties, and I think culturally there's a lot of similarities as well, which makes it very
For
easy.
example?
Yeah, just obviously that it's glad to hear David talking about the long-term vision, because in a startup and innovation, it's not just about an idea, it's about a lot of trial and error, a lot of iterative changes to the design, so you're in a kind of a longer-term journey, and I think that fits very well with Japanese psyche, and then everything else from even culturally and bringing them over here to Galway and going out for dinner and a glass of whiskey, and yeah, certainly it all fits very well.
The Japanese verb to drink is called nomu, but they actually say no communication instead of communication. So a lot of the real business is when you're drinking in the evenings with colleagues. That's not official, that won't go in the assembly, okay.
Just one point,
please.
that's not to be underestimated.
Oh no.
The soft parts of doing business are very, very important. And culturally, Japanese companies who work with Irish companies and vice versa find that the fit is very good. And that does really help. When you're looking at a long-term partnership and vision, the fact that you can actually understand each other and the communication is very, very good. Is not to be underestimated.
It is, and also when I worked in Japan, I won't say which organisation, but I used to be fascinated that the senior people would meet the evening before a particular meeting, and they'd be, let's say, 2 organisations. So the senior people would be there and have a meal and drinking, and they would decide what the conclusion of the official meeting the next day would be. And then other people would gather at the meeting and they would inform them, like, this is the decision. But they said they always had huge conflict with American colleagues who come in, because the Americans actually believed that decisions would be made at the meeting, but that's never the case, you know what I mean? They were like, why would they believe this, you know? And what was interesting to me, what you said is, they decided based on their desire to partner with someone. The core decision was, do we invite them to the evening before the meeting or not? So if you go to the evening before, you're doing business. If you're not at the evening before, forget it. It's just a waste of time, you know. And okay, look, I'm very conscious of time. John, we started with you, so we'll finish with you. Could I ask you, if you don't mind, you said a very inspiring thing yesterday, and I've learned now that the human hair is 30 microns, and you were on about 1 to 5 microns for your mesh technology. But could I ask you to talk about something totally different? The motivation of people in your sector to make a difference, you know, for the greater good. And you talked about helping premature babies and the work you're doing in this, and an enormous challenge. Could you just briefly explain this to people? Because I thought it was very inspiring.
Yeah, I guess for good or bad engineers, you know, I've been engineering, well, I started when I was 16, I did my engineering through night school. I started as a draftsman, but, you know, if you think what really defines engineering is solving problems, you know, we've kind of geared a bit that way. It's like one of my favourite sayings, my wife, we've got 5 kids, so, you know, you'll get a few problems, right, with 5 kids. And my wife got to the point she'd say to me, now, John, I'm going to tell you about a problem, but I don't want your solution. Because I honestly thought that's what you should be doing. If someone gives you a problem, you've got to solve it, you know, it's immediate. But I guess seriously how that plays out in MedTech in our world, it was, you know, seeing myself working on, I worked on life support design and life support ventilation, and you know, it's a pretty critical piece of kit in a hospital. There aren't too many things actually keep you alive in the hospital. You know, there's a lot of diagnostics, equipment and treatments, but you know, life support, ventilation, dialysis, these are the things that keep someone alive. So obviously the amount of technology that goes into a life support ventilator is huge. And to try and, I worked in robotics for several years and I loved it working with robots, but when you see a ventilator working, it's like one of the closest human-machine interactions you will ever get if you've got a good ventilator, because you've got to wean that person back off that support from the machine to be able to survive without the machine ultimately. So it's very sophisticated equipment. So really, in my case, working on that and seeing that the methods, the sophistication that went into ventilator design, and then seeing the way drugs were delivered to patients on ventilators. If you think a good proportion of people in ICUs on ventilators have lung conditions, and yet the way the drug was being delivered to those patients was predominantly intravenously. So you've got to pump these drugs around the system and through the organs to try and reach the lung. Whereas really, if you think sort of targeted drug delivery is key, you know, to give the minimum amount of drug to be effective, you need to do, in our case, I think, well, it should be through aerosolization. As the ventilator's delivering, you deliver the drug. And that's really was the catalyst for Aerogen to develop a technology when I found out how difficult it was to do that right. And that's where the 5 microns and 3 micron particles are required to travel down through the airway and bounce down the airway. But I guess in the case of so that's a problem we kind of solved. We've been number 1 in the world in that space now. But then I guess the next problem, the big problem that I'd seen in hospitals was premature babies. And when a baby's born premature, the natural, there's a surfactant which is a protein phospholipid that's naturally triggered by the baby coming up to prior to full gestation and being delivered so that it can breathe in the air, right? So that the lungs will operate and contract and expand and allow gas to exchange and oxygen into the system. So the problem is premature babies don't have surfactant triggered, so they're born without the surfactant in their lung, and it makes their lung very stiff. And so if you see an incubator, if you see prem babies on TV or anything on an incubator, watch the rate they're breathing at. So we would breathe maybe 20 breaths per minute. Baby in the incubator could be breathing 80 breaths per minute. So it's really literally like this if you watch them. And that's hugely energy consuming and exhausting for the prem baby. And it's hard to get energy into a prem baby, right? About 40 years ago, they discovered if they took and you see the surfactant is the lubricant. It's a bit like WD-40 in the lung. It allows the lungs to open, expand, contract, alveoli to open. So about 40 years ago, they discovered that if you took the surfactant from the lungs of calves and pigs and what have you, and distilled this down and refined it, you could put it into the lung of the baby, and it improved the survival rate of prem babies massively, hugely. The only problem was when I went to see this, again, problems coming up for an engineer. The first time I've seen a baby surfactant being delivered to a baby, I was horrified, because I just couldn't believe any docs are here or neonatologists, they'll know how it's done, but you basically have to, you've got this very immature body that you could hold in your hand, and you've got to use a laryngoscope to open up the airways, and then they try and thread an ET tube down into the baby's bifurcation point of the lung without puncturing it, because you imagine these airways are paper thin in many ways. And then they pour this surfactant in and they bag it with a little ambu bag, and then they shake the baby all round to try and coat the lung, and they pour it out of the baby's mouth so before it asphyxiates on it. So it's really, I was there, I was like, having worked on life support beds and then seeing this, I was like totally horrified. I thought, this can't be happening, and that's what would happen today in every hospital around the world. That's how surfactant is delivered. And I figured, well, we've got to be able to solve that problem. But that is, I'm going to go on too long here now, but solving that was another big problem, and we figured, people had tried it when I looked into it and failed. But our technology, in the next generation of our technology, we had to develop a new step change in the technology to be able to aerosolize surfactant, because it's very difficult material to aerosolize. But we've done that. We've completed our phase 2 trials, 2B trials in America now, and we'll be going for a pivotal trial on this early next year. And if that's successful, we'll change the way surfactant is delivered to these babies and reduce all the complications that it causes post-delivery. So that's, I don't know if that's kind of what you're talking about, but it's problems and solutions. But of course, you pick the hardest problems are always the best, because they're the most interesting to engineers and scientists, not necessarily to financial people. But anyhow, we're run by engineers and scientists rather than finance people.
Don't worry, we love engineers. This was co-founded by Dr. Tom Hardiman, who sadly passed away during COVID, but it was age. And Tom was one of the architects of modern Ireland, but a proud engineering graduate of UCD, and he kept telling us the engineering mindset, so we love engineers. Could we thank the panel, please, everyone? Thank you, Nigel, Marc, John, David, and Hideo-san. Could I ask you to take your seats?